If you would introduce yourself to us, give us your name and a little bit about your background.
Okay.
Yes.
You tell me when you're ready.
No, I'm ready.
Okay. The name is Biko, Fennie Biko. I'm a lecturer at the University of London, Birkbeck College. I lecture in African World Studies, which is a multidisciplinary field of study, which directly focuses on classical African civilization and connects it to contemporary societies, both African and diaspora. This was a course that I started teaching over 11 years ago now, which I designed myself. It's a multidisciplinary course. Okay.
All right. What we want to talk about today is Ethiopia. And we want to look at Ethiopia and the links between Ethiopia and Egypt. So if you could kind of give me an insight to the ancient Ethiopia, who the people were in terms of their origin and their relationship with Egypt.
The term Ethiopia, being of Greek origin, is used very loosely in a very stretched manner. That is to say, if we look at the etymology of the term, being two compounds, Ethiop and ups, it simply means or denotes literally black face, i.e. a black person. The term is often used in a very stretched manner to cover vast expanses of area, and that's item number one. Number two, it also is used in a manner that contracts, so that you can go back as far as, let's say, Homer, who has used the term Ethiops in one respect, speaking about Greek gods banqueting in Ethiopia. You can follow that with Herodotus, who points out that Ethiopia is of two in type as far as the physical projection of people are concerned. He pointed out that Ethiopia includes both what we call Africa today, that is what was known of it at the time, and also what is known as Asia, or rather India today. He pointed out that Ethiopia is divided into two parts, that which is in Libya, which is Africa, in his sense, and that which is in India. He said, however, in the two Ethiopias, though they have similar skin color, the ones in India have a straight hair, and the ones in Libya have the woolliest hair amongst all mankind. So there was that distinction. What he was saying, What he was saying, in essence, is that the peoples of India and Africa share a similar hue, but they're differentiated primarily by the hair type. Okay, now, so that's Ethiopia in that sense, covering dark-skinned people, both in India and Africa. Then there's Ethiopia in the contracted sense of where black people are met within what we call Africa, at least that part of it that was known. That is the second notion of Ethiopia. Then there is Ethiopia in the ancient or classical sense of the word, meaning particularly Kush. Starting with the proto-national constellation of Nubia, that is Tasseti, and then expanding beyond Tasseti to the kingdom of Kush much later on. And then, of course, expanding as far as Aksum and beyond Aksum to Habashan, which formed what we know today as the root of Abyssinia, which then became Ethiopia again in the modern age. So the term Ethiopia is really quite, it has contracted and expanded over the ages in its uses. Now, specifically, there is another sense in which we use the term Ethiopia, namely that the people of African origins, or I should say the earliest branch of mankind, are also referred to in those senses. That is to say, a rejection of the term Negro or Negroid at times is replaced by the term Ethiops or Ethiopia or Ethiopians, meaning black people. So the term has contracted and expanded. It has shifted over a period of time. The sixth item is that, excuse me, while the origin of humanity is rooted in Africa itself, it's rooted in a specific part of Africa, namely the countries of the Rift Valley. Those countries embraces what we call Ethiopia today, modern state Ethiopia, and Kenya as well as Tanzania. Now, those three countries in particular constitutes the region in which the earliest hominids, that is to say human skeletal remains, have been unearthed in the Rift Valley region. Rift as in not flat grassland, but rather ridges of mountains and hills. Okay, those constitutes the region in which the earliest hominids have been unearthed to date, and ever still earlier hominids are unearthed almost yearly now as a ritual. Up until last year, hominid was unearthed and dated to 6.2 million years ago. Okay, that forms part, which means it's older than Australopithecus ramidus. It's older than Afarensis. Okay, these were 3.4 million years old. Okay, so we've now moved even beyond that. So, ever we are confirming without any shadow of doubt the African origins of humanity itself. Now, our contention there is that not only did humanity began from Africa, but a specific part of Africa, East Africa in particular. And that then serves to instruct us as to why society would have emerged in that part of Africa, namely if it is indeed East Africa that humanity began. Then East Africa, of course, gives us the longest river in the world. And we know for sure that early societies are all, especially civilizations, are all riverine cultures. The longest river in the world is found right there in the junction between the Great Lakes and the Nile Valley, starting from the Great Lakes and outpouring over into the Mediterranean, 4,000 miles long.
Right.
Okay. So human culture itself is, if you like, in a sense, Ethiopic.
Now, what would be the connection between Ethiopia and Egypt? Because we have so many relics, primary evidence of Egypt's ascendancy to and its contribution to world civilization. We don't have as much in Ethiopia. At least it is not of age. There's some in Aksum, but that's a later civilization. What would be the links between Egypt and Ethiopia?
As you said, Aksum is a much later society and whole picture. Undoubtedly, as you mentioned, there has been excuse me, an immense shortage of material by comparison with Egypt in what we refer to generally as Ethiopia. I want to stress particularly, I'll rather the term either Nubian or Kushite here, so as not to confuse the expression Ethiopia with the modern day Ethiopia. Okay. Then we can begin to run into a lot of problems.
All right. Okay. Yes.
So, undoubtedly, there is a direct relationship, one of parent and child, between ancient Nubia, that is to say, the nation which formed, or what we might call Proto-Kush, and that of Kemet. We know from evidence of excavations in the 60s, from about 1963 onwards, by the Oriental Institute, University of Chicago, that without a doubt we find the proto-societies which led to a flowering further north in Egypt, starting from lower Nubia, that is to say, those areas falling in the borders of what we call Sudan today. So there's a direct connection between the Rift Valley on the one hand, where humanity began, and the Nile Valley on the other. It is not an accident that they're in fact next door to each other, the Rift Valley and the Nile Valley. That is a direct consequence, direct outgrowth of human instincts to creativity. Secondly, archaeological evidence points to this much as far as the story around Kush is concerned. That is to say, early Nubia, prior to the kingdom of Kush itself. One, the rudiments of what was to be called hieroglyphs emerged there and has been found there in Kusto, in Nubia, Cemetery Hill. Excuse me. Secondly, the idea of divine kingship, pharaonic rulership, has also been confirmed there, as we find in the census, the incense burners, which was unearthed by Keith Seal's team and later on documented by Bruce Williams. Thirdly, the idea of the Trinity conception of religion, the Trinity religion, which was later going to be elaborated in Kemet, Egypt itself proper, with Asa, Heru, and Set. That also we can find on the censer. We find several passages, several scenes in which Asa, that is Osiris, is documented with the falcon, which is symbolic of Heru, horse, right there beneath him, just above his head. So that is very clear. And that besides, the dating on these relics indicate to us, without a shadow of yeah, and that besides, archaeological dating by through radiocarbon technology indicates that there are at least 4 generations of proto-Nubians, or we might say proto-Kushites, in Kusto, which preceded the emergence of the idea of divine kingship, or for that matter, the emergence of a dynastic generation in Egypt itself. So we have a direct connection there. We would find those ideas later on elaborated in the philosophical, religious, theological spheres in Egypt.
Now, are you saying that the first Egyptians actually were just an extension of the Kushites, which were Nubian, because Ethiopia, as we know it today, is a modern term. But when we say Nubia, we are talking about one people. So the beginnings of Egypt would have been founded by Ethiopian, by Nubian people.
Yes, undoubtedly there's a direct kinship between the so-called Nubian and Egyptian, even though when you use the term, just in the same manner in which there's a direct kinship between the Yoruba and the Igbo. That is to say, they emerge from a common seed, they emerge from a common well, so to speak. So yes, indeed, there is a direct kinship between the elements who were to become the Nubians and later on those who were to become the Egyptians.
Can you tell us then why the Ethiopians, the Nubians, look a little different than what the presentation of the Egyptian people in terms of skin color, say for an example? Is there a reason for that might be spiritual or representational?
In fact, there is absolutely no difference in the manner in which the Egyptians represent themselves and represent the Nubians. That is to say, the Egyptians represent the male, usually. If we study Egyptian art, the male are usually generally represented with the color red, the female generally with the color yellow. Now, the male are also represented with another color. That is the color black. So you might see a picture of Tutankhamun painted as black, as much as you will see a picture of Tutankhamun painted as red. Then there are other color variations. Now, likewise, you might see a scene of Egyptians and Nubians at war, in which the Nubians are portrayed in both red and black. Okay? So using both the red and black motif for males in Egyptian art is a very, very common phenomenon. Now, on the other hand, there are also other colors. Namely, you have the blue employed and the green. Okay, those are the basic variation in Egyptian art. Now, let's speak to the meanings of these colorations.
Yes.
The red and the yellow is a standard in Egyptian art for male and female. Now, there are exceptions to those rules. There are occasions in which the female is painted red. However, when the female is painted red, you will quickly note that the background is other than red. Okay, that's straight away. Yeah. So that gives you. So it's like a reversal. It's like what we call the negative in the modern age. When you take a film, take a shot, there is a negative. So that's the negative. If the background is yellow, the female will be painted red. If the background is red, or otherwise, excuse me, the female's conventional color in Egyptian art is yellow. The yellow denotes the moon. The red denotes the sun. That is to say, the redness is fire. That's the symbolism of the male. The yellow is the moon. That's the symbolism identified with females. Okay, so in essence, theirs is a cosmic philosophy. It's a cosmic ideology, if you like. It's one in which beings and non-beings are essentially indivisible. They are part and parcel of the cosmos as large. Okay, we'll need more time to go into this. The blue is another variation in color. The blue is of the sky, of the heavens. So you might see Ptah occasionally created with blue. Ptah is a creator deity. Or the green, you might see Osiris painted in green.
Right.
The green pertains to vegetation. Okay, so there are very, very profound reasons behind the color schemes. I have a paper written around the subject, which I've published already. So, okay.
But black essentially would represent what?
Black represents two things. One is that which is fertile, and also their natural scheme, the natural color scheme. So that if you go to the temple of, I think it's Amenemhat I, you would notice initiation scene in which he is in his natural color, which is the black as a male, and he then went through initiation in which you will notice he changed to red. He was initiated by Thor in the legend. In that instance, he was colored red right after the initiation. In short, he's now in his divine incarnation. In his divine incarnation, he is the sun. He's no longer just an ordinary being. Okay. And that same color scheme was picked up later on by the Kushites. So that there are also Kushite tombs in which you'll find the exact color scheme, in which they began also to portray the women yellow and the male red. Okay, so the relationship is very cognizant, and furthermore, it's a cosmic philosophy that we're talking about here, rather than a racial ideology.
I didn't want to keep you a long time, but can I ask you a few more questions?
Please.
Okay, in relationship to the cosmology.
Hope I get a copy of this.
Yes, by all means. In relationship to the cosmology and their worldview, I want to look at as a liberating principle, ma'at. At first, maybe if you could explain ma'at and true of voice, and then I want to ask you some subsequent questions related to ma'at and our liberation today in terms of principles and values that enabled the Egyptians to build what they built, enabled Ethiopians to be called the people of God, the most honest and so forth. But I wanted you to deal with those principles that became the primary value system of a people, and therefore open them up to unbelievable understanding and relationships with nature. Yes.
Ma'at can be understood through many dimensions. Whichever be the case, it has both a cosmic, excuse me, it has both a cosmic and an organic implication. I'll explain.
Okay.
On the one hand, there is a message in the physical representation of Ma'at. The goddess Ma'at, you'll note usually is on her knees. Furthermore, you'll note she faces the right, not the left. Never the left. There's a reason for that. When she's on her knees, she's facing the right with her wings outstretched. Now, there are reasons behind this. That is instructional. In African cultures, in general, without exception, I know of no exception, the left is identified with negativity, the right with positivity. You do not give or receive with the left. Okay, the right is identified with positivity. The direction of the figure Ma'at, the physical incarnation of Ma'at, which is feminine, the principle, is deliberately, excuse me, deliberately faces the right. Okay. Then there is the cosmic dimension, namely that the male counterpart to the goddess Ma'at, note, is Tehut, or Tha. That male counterpart to the goddess Ma'at is representative of that which is good speech, the word, knowledge, wisdom. Hence, Ma'at is dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic equilibrium. between the one and the many, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
between the day and the night, between the male and the female, between order and disorder,
Mm-hmm.
dynamic equilibrium, okay, between the heavens and the earth. Now, in order to effect Ma'at, not only does it call for thought and the wisdom, the good speech, the precision with which he brings, but the incarnation of thought in its very animated sense, namely in its Ka embodiment. There is an aspect of Ma'at, again in its cosmic sense, which governs the universe.
Mm-hmm.
In Egyptian thoughts, that means you have the figure Nut, which is representative of a general translation will be the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, representative of the sky. On the other hand, contrasting Nut is Geb, which is the earth. Now, Geb, the earth, in African thoughts, is male, not female. The earth in African thought, even in Yoruba thoughts, it's male, not female. So we do not say Mother Earth, we say Father. My fatherland, not my motherland.
I know that.
Okay.
I thought it was the other
So
way around.
people thought it was the other way around. Many people think it's the other way around. Now there's a reason behind that.
Mm.
The female is that which is above, it's in the heavens. And we can trace the same parallel in Egyptian thought. The heavens is feminine
Mm-hmm.
in their symbology, in their conception. The earth is masculine. Okay. Hence you would notice Nut stretching on all fours, with the arms
Right.
stretched downwards and the legs stretched downwards on all fours. Okay. In Egyptian frescoes, you might have seen some of this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then you'll notice Geb with one leg raised, and then often you would notice another figure between both of them.
Yeah.
A figure holding Nut
Mm-hmm.
with two arms,
Mhm.
one to her pubic region, one to her breast. That figure is Shu. That is moisture. That is to say, between the heavens and the earth is moisture. It is not just space. That space is a dynamic in itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not its appearance in space as space, but it's a dynamic in itself. That is Shu. Okay. Now, that cosmic ambience is again what Ma'at is about, which is between one factor and the other, one feature and the other, other than the moral dimensions, the moral precepts that Ma'at again implies. Other than moral precepts, the moral and ethical dimensions, this principle of dynamic equilibrium, a balance between the one and the many, between one factor and the other, that is one that I think is very liberating. Namely, it acts against excesses. That is number one. Two, it definitely is not a mystical conception of the world, the idea of Ma'at. More than that, it advocates a very dynamic balance between that which we call spiritual or metaphysical and that which we call material or physical. So that often there is a huge campaign or there's a huge denial, I should say, against the material, and there's a strong emphasis on the spiritual. Well, in Egyptian thought, the physical itself are but embodiments of the spiritual. I hope you can follow me. The physical are but embodiments. In other words, matter is spirit crystallized.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the idea that there's a separation between spirit and matter is not valid to that mode of thought. There is no separation between spirit and matter. In fact, if anything, there is an organic relationship between spirit and matter.
Very
Matter
important.
is spirit crystallized,
Mm-hmm.
but something stands between the physical crystallization and the abstract or non-physical manifestation.
Mm-hmm.
That is Shu. That is the force.
Mm-hmm.
The Shu was the one separating the heavens from the earth, if you recall, in the illustration I gave you earlier. Something stands between them. That force which stands between them is the third dynamic. So, in a very symbolic way, Ma'at can be seen also as a construct. Other than the ethical dimension, truth, all the reciprocity, justice, all of that stuff, other than the ethical principle implied as a tool of emancipation for world Africans today, Ma'at calls for what I call the Nebma'u, what the Egyptians call Nebma'u, Nebmau means, in essence, one who possesses many eyes. To possess many eyes, to give it a modern, contemporary analogy, would be to say, on the one hand, when you put on the history spectacles, you will see historical material. When you put on the philosophy spectacles, you'll see philosophical data. When you put on the psychology spectacles, you'll see data pertaining to psychology, and so on and so forth, depending on which spectacles you're putting on at one time. Nebmau means specifically one who possesses many eyes. I guess it's similar in a way to what we call multi-perspective. Similar. Now, if we evoke Nebmau, that means that Ma'at is no longer mystical or anti-materialist stance. Its deeper dimension is that we have the concept of Trinity, which has in fact been established in the antiquity of African thought. We have the concept of the Trinity as a model for thinking. The concept of the Trinity as a model for thinking means that we are caught perpetually as human beings in an eternal triangle. We're perpetually caught in an eternal triangle, and that eternal triangle reflects itself in all reality. That eternal triangle is the nut, the shoe, and the geb that I spoke of earlier on. That is one model, in fact, one of the earliest combination of Trinity we can speak about, before Osiris. Remember that these were Osiris's grandparents. Okay, so this was one of the earliest conception of Trinity. Now, that eternal triangle in concrete terms today for world Africans means that the major continents in the world, America, Asia, America we see very much as, Europe, Asia, and Africa. America we see very much really as a grandchild of Europe.
Right.
Okay, by and large. But Europe, Asia, and Africa need to establish an eternal triangle. America and its culture, its philosophy sector, is an extension of Europe. So America for us then is Europe. Okay, needs to establish a triangle, and or should I say, need to recognize an eternal triangle. Okay, the link is in fact the Americans, the African American especially, who have a knowledge of both sides. Okay, that they're the link. So the analogy then is that the African American tapping into the African data have appropriated the key, but the door lies on the African continent. Now, on the African continent, they have the door, but they don't have the key. The key is useless without the door. The door is also useless without the key. Okay? The African data having been appropriate, that is, when I say African data, I'm referring to that data which connects the African experience to its classical civilization. Okay. The African data, at this point in time, we might take a computer analogy. You have the hardware, then you have the software. You need the software for the computer terminal to work, for the computer unit to work, to perform. Without the software, the computer is useless. However, the computer malfunctions if there's something wrong with the software, namely if there's a virus.
Right.
So there's a virus in the African data. Now, how do you neutralize virus? You develop antibodies. Okay, what do antibodies do? They defend the system. So it's a system of immune defense. It's an immune defense system. So that immune defense system has to be created through a regenerated reconstruction and the de-virusing, neutralization of the virus on the African data. Otherwise, the African computer cannot act as instructed. Okay, so it cannot generate, it will malfunction, so to speak. Right. So the eternal triangle is one formula that I found useful in that respect. Namely, there has to be a bridge, a linking of arms between the African and the continent in the Western world and also the Asian world. We cannot ignore what's happening in Asia. It also has implications for world Africans. In that when Asia's population grows beyond what it can handle, it will be looking for resources. Europe went to Africa for resources. Europe stays in Africa for resources. So that's what's at stake. Who will dominate the resources? The African is on on world resources by and large. It's on the resources, but does not control the resources.
Let me go back just a little while. When you talked about that Trinity, does that Trinity have any relationship to biblical Trinity that we, African Americans are so accustomed to? But can you give us the evolution of the Trinity and how we can reconnect, since we're reconnecting, through what we have to its original source? So one doesn't have to run from what he has, but he needs to take off the European wrappings and understand what it is.
Okay, there are several trinities that I conceptualize, and I have an essay to this effect, likewise. There are several trinities that I conceptualize in this framework, in the framework of eternal triangles, as I call it. The trinity of connection, the trinity of connection of the type you're talking about is the trinity of nationhood. The trinity of nationhood have, on the one hand, land, language, and religion. Those are the elements, those are the factors involved in the trinity of nationhood. That is to say, peoples around the world who you find to be proud, productive, and respected, they have their language and religious systems in place.
Correct.
People in the world who you find to be, anywhere you find compromised, their language and religious systems are compromised in one way or the other. If they're respected, proud, and productive, their language and religion system is in place. So that's uniformed, worldwide, that's universal. Having seen that, then the land is a third dimension, the third factor there in that trinity. So that at the apex of that pyramid, that is the religious system, the belief system, the spiritual systems, call it what you will. On the left of that pyramid is land, okay, the generative substance. On the right of that pyramid is the language system. Now, undoubtedly for the African diaspora, the language system has been compromised. The African on the continent, the religious system has been compromised. Okay, so we have problems there. So it's for us to understand, to basically come to terms with this reality that, okay, here are the areas that are compromised. And those areas that are compromised simply need to be reconstructed. Now, the reconstruction is one that takes us back to the first time, to the earliest beginnings of our history. Namely, in the earliest times, we had Wahimi Masu, repetition of the birth. To repeat the birth, again, means literally to emulate our ancestors, the best of our ancestors. The emulation of the best of our ancestors in this instance calls for one respecting the communication systems that they devised. They left a language for us. In fact, they left so many, all we have to do is choose one. When we choose one, we find the glue of social cohesion. Without language, people have no cohesiveness. They have no connectedness. All they are is a band, a group, a crowd.
Are you saying that
there's no connectedness? So African Americans or African diasporans have to reconnect. They have to absorb, reintegrate, build on the foundations of their ancestral language.
this language is not sufficient?
Language is one.
English is not sufficient?
Not sufficient. Absolutely not sufficient. It's sufficient to feel a sense of connectedness to English people. Yes. But it's not sufficient to feel a sense of connectedness to themselves. Race is one dimension. The racial factor has meaning only in the context of either religion or language. One of the two or both. Mansa Musa, under Mansa Musa, the great African monarch, there was slavery. And not only was there slavery, but there was discrimination. That discrimination and the slave systems under Mansa Musa took place with religion as a mechanism of discrimination. Those who were Muslims versus those who were non-Muslims. And it became very convenient to take slaves from the areas of those who were non-Muslims. That's under Mansa Musa and others. Yeah. So on that side of Africa, you can take slaves. They are not Muslims. On this side, we are Muslims. You may not take slaves. So religion as a mechanism of discrimination is one. Race as a mechanism of discrimination is another, and there can be many others.
Yes.
So undoubtedly, religious and linguistic things are very important. So the two substances that I've outlined thus far, religion on the one hand, or belief systems, spiritual systems, that constitutes one social glue. Language constitutes another form of social glue. People can feel a sense of connectedness racially, but that is only one dimension. That racial connectedness gains reinforcements through a religion, racial and religious, or racial and linguistic. Okay, so, and of course, undoubtedly, of all these three, the religious connectedness have always proven stronger historically. Okay, people have always felt a stronger sense of ambience or kinship with some form of religious connectedness. Okay, history will outlaw us in that. Then there was the land factor. Now, Africans in diaspora not only have a land, as in a homeland, just in the manner in which the Jews claim Israel, Palestine, have a homeland. Even when they do not live in Palestine, they're very defensive of what happens to Israel. Very, very defensive. They're concerned as to what happens. They need their homeland in place. You can be a citizen of the world, but you need your space, you need your house, which speaks to your power. That is one. Then secondly, in the much more practical sense, the land of the eternal triangle that I've spoken of, the land factor still remains relevant even right here in the diaspora. Namely, we cannot build concretely without our own buildings. That is the land fact. That's the land part of the equation. You have your own building, you can begin to project. Okay, so I said land, language, and belief system. At the top of that pyramid, of that triangle, is the belief system, your religious system, spiritual system.
Biko, would you give us the full and correct pronunciation of your name?